Get ready for Netflix's gripping new medical drama, Pulse. Set in a cutting-edge Miami trauma center, third-year resident Dr. Danny Sims is unexpectedly thrust into a promotion when beloved chief resident Dr. Xander Phillips gets suspended. Then, with the emotional and physical stakes at their highest, a storm will push the hospital and its residents to their limits. Witness how life can change in a heartbeat when you're operating under pressure. Watch Pulse April 3rd, only on Netflix.
I can say to my new Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, hey, find a keto-friendly restaurant nearby and text it to Beth and Steve. And it does without me lifting a finger, so I can get in more squats anywhere I can. 1, 2, 3.
Will that be cash or credit?
Credit. 4.
Galaxy S25 Ultra, the AI companion that does the heavy lifting so you can do you. Get yours at Samsung.com. Compatible with select apps. Requires Google Gemini account. Results may vary based on input. Check responses for accuracy.
At T-Mobile, our critical mission is providing unparalleled 5G coverage for when connectivity is mission critical. Introducing T-Priority, America's best 5G network experience for first responders, even in times of congestion. More capacity, faster speeds, better coverage. T-Priority from T-Mobile, built for tomorrow's emergencies, ready today. Discover more at t-priority.com.
For qualifying organizations on eligible rate plans, coverage not available in some areas and may be impacted by emergencies.
The number one selling product of its kind with over 20 years of research and innovation. Botox Cosmetic, out of botulinum toxin A, is a prescription medicine used to temporarily make moderate to severe frown lines, crow's feet, and forehead lines look better in adults.
Effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness may be a sign of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Don't receive Botox Cosmetic if you have a skin infection. Side effects may include allergic reactions, injection site pain, headache, eyebrow and eyelid drooping, and eyelid swelling. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Tell your doctor about medical history, muscle or nerve conditions including ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects. For full safety information, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Meet Me at Musial. I'm your host, Daniel Shoptaw at C70, and with me this week, Matthew Leach. You'll know him from, well, you should know him from his work in St. Louis, but now he's the Twins beat writer. And Matthew, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a very long time. I'm not going to get mad at anybody who doesn't remember 14 years ago.
Yeah, it has been a while. And so that's really what I want to start with is you decided to get back into the beat writing business after being in upper management, as it were, at MLB.com. What made the decision for you? Well, I mean, there were a lot of factors, but I think what ultimately really made it appealing to me was, for a while I was a national reporter, which actually was all I ever really wanted to be, and I loved that. Some things happened that led me to managing beat writers. And I did that for, 6 or 7, maybe 8 years, and really loved it. Really enjoyed managing people that I have immense respect for, some of whom were good friends of mine and had been, side-by-side colleagues of mine for years. But the last few years, I had been heading up minor league and prospect content. And at first, that was still very much a baseball and a content job. As the years went by, and I was in it, I think 4 years, the role really changed. I'm going somewhere with this, I swear. Yeah. And it just took me farther and farther away from baseball and from, I hate the expression content creation, but from content creation, from being somebody whose primary knowledges and skills were communicating in baseball. I moved farther and farther away from those things. I think I actually got pretty good at managing humans also, and I like that. But, I think that what makes it really appealing is that I got so much farther away from interacting with baseball on a daily basis and with, writing or editing, which I also love, but wasn't really even editing copy, wasn't writing. And those are just the things that I love. I love being in the press box. I love being in a clubhouse.
I love being on deadline. It just the work is really suited to me.
So was it a choice to go to Minnesota, or was like one of the few jobs open and you thought that would be a good fit?
I mean, there were not a whole lot of options because, if you look at our turnover, we don't have a ton.
Right.
But, what I can say and would absolutely say is that if you gave me a list of all of the 30 beats and said you can pick any of them, it would be high on the list. It's really compelling in a lot of ways. I like the area. The travel is manageable, though not super easy. It's an organization filled with, it's overstating to say good people, but it's an organization. Well, not overstating. I don't know. I'm always loath to assume that I know whether someone's a good person, but it's an organization that really prides itself on being a good place to work and having people who are good to work with. And so, the people I cover, I enjoy covering them. The front office is good to work with. The PR staff is good to work with. The other people on the beat are great. We have become friends quickly. I knew a couple of them in the past, but it is. There were not a lot of choices, but even if I had a lot of choices, this one would have been high on the list.
I think, and the Twins are an organization, at least at one time, that had not only had a really strong blogging community as well. I don't know if that's still the case, but
absolutely, and in a really cool thing, one of the things that I saw, many years ago in St. Louis, and it did not evolve in the same way, but was seeing some of the folks who were however, I don't blog, internet, some of the people who were not traditional credentialed media sort of started to become credentialed and be around. They've got their most prominent blog, Twins Daily. Those guys are credentialed and in. They know, they report. One of them. So it is cool, and I just think that is also an emblem of a symbol of an engaged community. It is. It's a community. They care about the team. And I feel like one of the other reasons it makes it a really good place to work is that, like St. Louis, not completely like, there are very few places where the breadth of baseball interest is like it is in St. Louis, but it's got a somewhat similar combination of people care. There are a lot of Twins fans. They care. They pay attention. But I'm 50, man. I don't want to cover the Dodgers. I don't want to cover the Yankees. I don't want that life. I don't want every time, somebody has something different for lunch, you're writing 500 words on it. That is a younger person's game. And I really like this combination of people care, but it's not absolutely everything nationally at all times.
Yeah, it's kind of that Midwest stereotype, right? There's a passion there, but it kind of gets contained a little bit as well.
Yeah, it's a good fit.
So has the return to beat writing, has it surprised you how easy it was? Has it been difficult? What have you felt so far?
I think that I'm really well equipped from how the last several years have gone, because I think the thing that feels the most different is, and I want to be clear about this because I take the work very seriously. It's my name on it every day, and that matters. The people I'm serving, the readers, care a lot. It matters to them. And so I want to be clear that it's not like I don't care, and it's not like I don't take the work seriously. But I think I have a much better understanding that, we're not curing cancer here, man. We're not war correspondents. This is not the end of the world. And, even more specifically, I got a much better understanding that every one of the guys in that clubhouse is just as full of bleep as I am. And that's a much easier thing to understand at 50 than at 30. And so, the work is the work, man. Talking to people is talking to people. And I feel like I'm a better interviewer. I'm better about sort of being light on my feet and asking follow-up questions when somebody says something interesting, and sort of having that click in real time and saying, oh, let's talk more about that, rather than sort of realizing later and saying, man, I wish I'd asked about that. So I think there's some things I'm better at. But I think mostly it's a level of perspective that is really valuable, and I think makes it a better life.
So when you took the job and started looking at this team in Minnesota, what stood out to you, and has your initial impression been confirmed or challenged?
I read a lot. I tried to read everybody, and I tried to, I watched some games, but I didn't really have. It's hard to have an impression of a team that you've sort of never been engaged with, So like, I can't really say, oh, this is what I thought they were going to be, and then they were this. It was really learning. Again, like I said, I tried to learn as much as I could, but to really get a feel for it took being down in Fort Myers and drinking from the fire hose. And I did a roster projection, and I got some things wrong, and because you do. So, I think, look, broadly, they are more or less what I thought. It should be a very good rotation. I'm not sure there's a 1 in there, but, there might be 3 2s. It should be a very, very good bullpen. If there's a thing I read wrong, I think I probably underestimated how good the offense can be. I think they can be a very good offense if they're healthy. There are some guys, you sort of read names and you look at numbers, and you look at somebody like a Larnick or a Wallner, and I know Wallner put up really good numbers, but you look you watch Matt Wallner hit, and it's like, holy cow, man, the ball just jumps off his bat. And then you look a little closer, and you're like, oh, he did that in 70 games the year before. I was like, oh, that guy might be a dude. And you sort of, it's you watch Buxton play, and he ceases to be like, the avatar of heartbreaking, talent that can't stay healthy. You actually watch Byron Buxton play, you're like, wow, man, Byron Buxton's a ball player, and I think Correa is maybe also a guy that, like, I'm not sure you quite appreciate until you see, and he didn't even hit that well this spring, but, he's not what you might think of as a classic spectacular shortstop. You watch a dude play shortstop, and he's so smooth, and he's so much fun to watch. So I think if there's something that I maybe didn't quite process, there's a lot of good players on the offensive side for this team. Doesn't mean they're going to score a lot of runs, because there's some weird fits, but I think I probably did not quite grasp that, like, there's a really good offensive core here.
Yeah, and I think we saw, just, one game, but we saw a little bit of a glimpse of that yesterday. I don't, Sonny Gray did well to start with the game, but, in those middle innings, the offense kind of came together a little bit.
Yeah, and look, it's going to be, they're in a tough spot right now, because they have, it's only 2 injuries to the lineup, but it's 2 injuries that were really poorly placed, and so it's not that they don't have guys who can hit, like, even on the bench or whatnot, but it's kind of tough to use everybody they have, because they're down 2 infielders and 2 of their probably 3 best defensive infielders, or 2 of their best 4. And so, we're probably still, even though it's only 2 guys, and even though Brooks Lee, didn't really hit last year, I think that the effects of having to really maximize the defense that you have is going to limit to some extent how they use the bats they have. But yeah, I think, it was a weird game in both directions. But on the Twins side, like, Correa hits a, it was only like 92 off the bat, but it was a solidly struck ball right at the middle that turns into a double play. Ty France hit 2 balls over 370 feet that were outs. That game could have been a lot different. Could have been different the other direction too. But it was, I think you saw, the lineup depth. I think they have a number of guys who can be pretty good.
And I did want to ask you, what was it like to look at that schedule when you got the job and know that the first place you were going as a regular season game was St. Louis?
I definitely laughed. There's an expression about in baseball, that applies to writers just as much as ball players. It says the ball will find you, which normally from a writer's perspective means that like when you're unprepared, something huge is going to happen. But it did. It felt a little like that the ball will find you. But yeah, it's great. I mean, it was weird walking in, but it's been great. I was really, and I don't know what perceptions of this are. I feel like Busch Stadium's aged far better than I thought it would. Really? My feeling after 5 years of Busch Stadium was that like maybe after 10 or 15 years, people would already be saying like, man, this thing's looking old. And I kind of feel like the opposite. I feel like it's aged really nicely. I feel like it has become a nicer place to go into. So I appreciate that. But yeah, look, it feels good when, the clubhouse attendant I have a 10-minute conversation with, when, the security guard at the visiting clubhouse checks me in and I'm walking out and he's like, I thought I recognized your name. That's been really cool. It's really nice. It is nice, to be remembered for something I really love doing and took seriously and hope. I hope I'm remembered fondly, and at least a few people have said that, and it really means a lot. It's really cool.
Yeah, and you've I don't know if it's better or worse, but it's the turnover has been, I wouldn't say notable, but it's been, like you said, it's been 14 years, and so it's Derek and maybe about it. That, so it's not like all your old friends are on one side and you're on the other. It is a new experience.
Yeah, and that is one, I don't want to take too far down this road, but I given the opportunity, I'm going to take a second to shout out some people who are really important to me. It's not the same without Joe Strauss, and it's not the same without Rick Hummel, it's not the same without Brian Burwell. Like those people were influential on me. When I started out, I didn't know what I was doing, and people like Joe and Kamish. Brian wasn't there when I started, and Bernie Miklas and Joe Ostermeyer and Dave Wilhelm and R.B. Fallstrom. These people were wonderful to me, and they were supportive. They let me know when I stepped out of line. They let me know how I could be better. They were great, and a big part of why, to the extent that I am successful now, is the influence that those people had. And so it was great to see Derek, and there's certainly people, the whole media relations staff, I think just about is the same as when I left. I think there's one change as far as the day-to-day. But, the flip side of all of the people that it is great to see and all of the familiar faces is, there are definitely some faces missed in the press box, and not just people who left. As you mentioned, there have been a number of people in the MLB.com Cardinals job, and a number of people turning over at the Post and in various places. But I would, since we are sort of somewhat freeform here, I would take the moment to just sort of appreciate that there are a lot of people who were deeply influential to me who are not in that press box anymore. And in that regard, it's not the same.
And it didn't have to be, though. You were creating that MLB.com job, kind of as you went along, and they did not have to look at a competitor. I put air quotes a little bit, but they didn't have to look at you like that. They could have made it difficult, and they didn't.
You're absolutely right. And in particular, I think about somebody like Bernie, who may as well have been my press agent. Bernie would have me on and talk me up and give me an opportunity to show what I knew. Joe was a fierce competitor, man. Joe's a fierce competitor, but he was fair. And that there's no better way to get better than somebody who is going to make sure that you bring your best every day, but is also never going to play dirty. And Joe never played dirty with me. It was always fair. It was competitive but fair. But especially, absolutely. And look, the other thing is, and we don't need to get too far into this, but it was a little bit of a mess. I started on this beat the Cardinals beat on the second year that MLB.com had the club sites. And, without unnecessarily getting the details, the first year was a bit of a mess. There was a reason that after 1 year they brought me in. And, the people who had been doing that job didn't necessarily make great impressions. And so, the point of what you said there, the reason I'm saying this is to reinforce what you were saying, which is they didn't have to. And in fact, they really didn't have to, because in some of those cases, their impression of MLB.com, of STLCardinals.com, was not a positive one. And so not only did they have to choose to be supportive of a younger person, they had to say, they had to choose not to tar me with the same brush that they could fairly have based on what I was preceded by.
Wow. And honestly, I didn't even realize. I thought you were the first one. So I guess that definitely didn't make an impression much like you did, or you wiped it out very quickly, I guess let's put it that way. So you've been away, and I wanted to ask you, because you're a person that was here during the heyday, and then now you've been out of the closed circle, if it will, for the last decade and a half. And as you've been away, looking back at St. Louis, what has been your impression of how things have gone?
It's really weird, and I think it's such a glass half full, glass half empty thing, because I absolutely am sympathetic, especially the last couple of years, to the notion that there were opportunities that were not executed, and that I get fans who sort of look at teams that have fallen short and can point at how and why. And, I'm in particular, I think, sympathetic to, how player development hasn't turned out the same way. Because that was such an engine here. They just cranked out, even if they weren't cranking out stars, they cranked out good player after good player after good player. And that allows you, when you've got a team full of good players that you developed, it allows you to go and get Matt Holliday and pay him. And I am very much sympathetic to how a lot of those things that people got used to have changed. At the same time, I do think that, the last year or so accepted, and I understand that, that there have, 83 and 79. Okay. In 23, I understand that was a bad year. Nobody ever wants to go 71 and 91, and I get that. But I also think, and I want to make sure I put this right, because fans should fan however they want. The fans should want what they want, and fans, the fact that fans care and have high standards is why I have a job. But I do think that maybe there is some lack of perspective for how hard it is to be good as consistently as they have been good, and how many fan bases would trade places with this one. And so, it's a weird line to walk. And, yesterday, look, I fans boo owners sometimes, and I'm not going to criticize anybody. The thing that was really surprising to me was when they, sort of made a point that this is Mo's farewell, right? It wasn't just, and here is the president of baseball operations. It was, this guy is leaving the organization. Let's take a moment to look back on what he has accomplished. And it was surprising to me that there were as many boos in that as there were, because I think that you can be frustrated and you can be excited for new leadership. And I'm really curious to see what new leadership does here. But I don't know how you can look at the entirety of that tenure and see it as anything other than something to be celebrated, and a person who almost certainly is going to be in the Cardinals Hall of Fame at some point in the not too distant future. And so that was kind of jarring to me. And it's a fine parsing. I get that. But okay, you're introducing people and you express your frustration. I get that. But when they sort of make the point to say, as he is stepping away, let's take a moment to appreciate this, frankly, monumental figure in the history of the franchise, it was surprising and a little disappointing to me that more people weren't able to sort of look at the long view and say, you know what, even if I'm ready for new leadership, this has been one heck of a run.
Yeah. And I don't know if that is a statement on general society and our inability to look past anything. But, I also think as fans, we do get trapped in the moment. I think about reading, you think about Keith Hernandez, if you want to go back, goes to the Mets, and I think his returning back in the 80s was not great, but now he's got a red jacket, and anytime he's in St. Louis, he's getting and I think that, Mo's going to have that kind of,
Yes.
glow up, if you will, in the future as well. But there are people that just, this is the moment I am mad at Mo right now, and he is terrible, and I can't think it past that.
Yeah. No, and I get that. And again, look, this is one of those other things that I've really softened on. It's like, man, fan how you're going to fan. Like, I'm not here to police anybody, so I'm not going to say, how dare you? I'm not going to say you're wrong. If that's your opportunity to express your frustration, I'm not going to say it's wrong. I just personally found it disappointing in that moment. And look, part of this is personal bias. I like Mo. I enjoyed covering him. He was good to me. He was good to me from before. Never mind before he was GM, before he was assistant GM. He was good to me. And so I fully grant there is some bias here. And I also fully grant that I have not watched the last 5 years as closely as the 5 years before that, as closely as the 5 years before that, as closely as the 5 years before that. I grant all of those things. But it definitely stood out a little bit to me that in that moment there wasn't more of an appreciation for the tenure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, like you said, people are going to do what they're going to do. And, here in a couple of days, we won't even think about it because we'll be on to the next thing. So how do you see this series? I mean, we've seen the first game. It looks like the two teams were fairly well matched. You got two more, Saturday and Sunday, weather permitting. How does it look for you?
I'm really, really interested. Excuse me. The thing I am most intrigued by in these next two games is the Twins pitching. Joe Ryan, and I wrote about this today. It's up on the site. Shut it down in August with a shoulder injury. By October, he said he felt fine. By November, he had a clear MRI. And then he started a little behind in spring and had one fewer start. Pitched pretty well, looked pretty good. But he's just like, everything, I'm not worried at all. And everybody I've talked to said, we're not worried at all. As far as we're concerned, it's Joe Ryan. Joe Ryan is Joe Ryan. He is the guy that we saw pitch like, at least a number two for the first 4 months of last year. I'm still curious. I still can't shake. There's something about shoulder that makes me antsy. I'm really curious to see, what he can do. And then, the next day, Bailey Ober's been searching for his velocity the last couple of starts. He's been 89, 90, and he's not a guy who throws 97, but like 89, 90 is, even if you've got a lot of movement and a lot of deception and a lot of variety, 89, 90 from the right side is tough to get big league hitters out in 2025. So, as far as what I'm looking at, that's what I'm looking at. I still think this is a weird assortment of pieces on this Twins roster. And the other part of it, as far as me watching, is that I'm having fun watching the tools of these young Cardinals. Those two plays that Victor Scott ran down, and not looking spectacular doing it, just like he's just that fast, and so he got there. That was really fun. Jordan Walker's arm, obviously Mason Wynn, like that. That is the thing that I would hope that Cardinals fans, even if this season doesn't go great, and even if there is frustration, I do hope that people can enjoy that there's some really fun players to watch on this team. And so I'm just going to enjoy watching Victor Scott run down balls in the outfield and watch Jordan Walker throw and watch Mason Wynn play defense and watch these guys run the bases, because there are fun guys to watch on this team.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the saving grace to some degree about, what has happened over the last year or two, especially when there's not been the investment as you would like to think into the major league roster, if nothing else, is the fact that this young core of is going to be fun. It's going to have a personality. I think it's going to be very interesting to see if Wilson Contreras wants to throw his hat off every time he goes chase a foul ball, which should be great. I think that I think that it's a lot of interesting parts here that, for the most part, doesn't feel like the Cardinals are just that far away from being back to where they were, just a few years ago.
Yeah, one of the weird things for me right now is that I don't know the league nearly as much as I did even 3 or 4 years ago because of what we were talking about with how I sort of moved farther away from ball. So it's hard for me to have much of a read on like them relative to the division. I think it's a really interesting division. I think there's a lot that I'm curious about, but like you could tell me, and this I'm saying this as much about my knowledge as about the team. You could tell me that team wins 75 games. You could tell me it wins 90 games, and I believe you either way. Like it's interesting. There are some, but I don't know, and so I'm curious to see what happens.
Should be fun. Matthew, I know you have a lot to do, especially with being in St. Louis and getting everything done. So I appreciate you taking a little time and talking about the teams.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Tying run at second base. In the air to right center. This game is tied. Going to third is Pujols, and it's 9-9. They just won't go away.
All right. Thanks to Matthew Leach for joining us earlier on Friday. Matthew being so busy, I did not want to hold him very long. And so I know that the show is, you tune into the show, you expect an hour. And so I hate to not give you that. But I also know you don't tune in to listen to me ramble for half an hour either. So bringing in, kind of like you do with a new prospect, you bring him in early, late in the game, get them ready. We're bringing in Thomas Gauvain from Redbird Rants. Thomas, your first time on the show. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Daniel. Thank you for having me on.
Well, glad to have you, and wanted to just kind of, hit the highlights of the first 2 days. Cardinals win both games against the Twins, and honestly, to me, getting a chance to watch it for the first time in a couple of years, there just wasn't a whole lot of downside over the last 2 days, was there?
No, it felt pretty good to watch. The players felt energized. It's always nice to start the season off at home, I think, so that gave them a boost as well. It seems to be a fun roster all around. You got a good mixture of youth and then the veterans with Contreras and Arenado, and it's exciting to have baseball back again in general.
Yeah, for sure. Let's just kind of, I guess, go through, maybe player. I don't want to go player by player, but just kind of in general. And I think, there was a lot of concern with Sonny Gray, the struggles that he had this spring, and as much as you want to say spring training stats don't matter and you ignore them, there's still that nagging issue in the back of your mind until he takes the mound, right? Mm-hmm. Pitched well. Still didn't have quite the velocity that he wanted to have, but he definitely looked a lot more like Sonny Gray than what we saw in spring.
He did. Yeah, he had good control of the game all around. He had that one blunder against Harrison Bader there with the home run. But aside from that, he looked pretty good. His velocity was down. Still a good strikeouts, 6 of them in just 5 innings. I think that's what you're looking for out of Gray, at least from a strikeout perspective. So first start of the year, I'll take that out of him.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're going to give up a home run to somebody, Harrison Bader, it's fine. I mean,
let that one slide.
Yeah. If you forget, the hometown hero who still got quite of an ovation, even though obviously it's not his first time back. But it was interesting to see that. But it was good for, things got a little dicey with the bullpen, but not terrible. I mean, there was, like tying run gets on or something like that, but in a close game, didn't take much. And, then Helsley came along and looked exactly like the Helsley of last year.
He did. Yeah, it was nice. A little bit bold of Oli to put out Phil Maton, I think, in the 8th inning with such a slim lead in the first game of the year, but he handled it well. And then Helsley with 3 strikeouts, it was nasty. He had some velocity concerns in spring too, if I remember correctly, and he's out there pumping 102 in the first game. So I think he quelled any concerns people might have had there.
Yeah, probably so. And yeah, I mean, Maton, what he got it? Did he get it? He got it to maybe one game in spring after they signed him. So he's not like he's been, still probably not quite at 100%. Mm-hmm. But it does feel like they're going to try to rely on him a little bit, right? I mean, he got the big one there today. Now today he comes in after the league gets expanded out to 4, but I wonder if they're expecting him to be that 7th inning guy for the regular.
Yeah, when they signed him, it felt a lot like what they were planning to do with Kittredge last year, and we heard a lot from Gould and other people about needing a new Andrew Kittredge essentially. So when they signed him, it seemed pretty clear to me at least that he'd be given that 8th inning role, setup man.
You know, we went all spring with Mason Wynn at the top of the lineup, but you know we had the game in Memphis on Monday, and then the 2 games here in against Minnesota, and I think more fittingly, Lars Nootbaar has taken that spot. Were you surprised? I mean, not that I think that the smart money, if you will, or the smart talk or whatever it is that Newt needs to be there because of his on base. But were you surprised that Oli changed things around like that?
I was, especially, I think I looked it up towards the end of spring training. I think Oli rolled out Mason Wynn 15 games at leadoff and Nootbaar 1 or 2. I actually think he put Victor Scott the second and Michael Ciani at leadoff more than Nootbaar throughout spring. So to see him there in Memphis and then opening day and then today as well on Saturday at leadoff, I preferred that for most of the offseason over Mason Wynn with his on-base skills, his ability to have some slug there at the top as well. He seemed like the perfect fit for leadoff. I know he doesn't have the prototypical speed that people think of a leadoff hitter from 80s, 90s, early 2000s, that kind of era. But he's definitely a modern day leadoff guy. And he fits the bill. He's done well so far. He's got 571 average, hits everywhere. It's nice to see him up there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, you know, I wonder if Mason Wynn had had a stronger spring, if they would have left him up there, or if this was all about, you know, just getting him at bats or something like that in the spring. But you look at this lineup, and especially when you get, you know, Scott and Wynn at the bottom of that, and you get one of those guys on, and then it turns over into Nootbaar and, you know, and Donovan and Contreras and Arenado. You know, it does feel like you don't have that dead spot right now in the lineup, that you're going to have something, even if everybody's not hitting for power, you've got the opportunity to make something happen with the bottom of the lineup too.
Absolutely. You look at last year's 7, 8, 9 guys, it was Pedro Bajes, Michael Ciani, and a random third guy. But then this year you see Jordan Walker, former top 5 prospect in all baseball, Victor Scott II, top prospect for the Cardinals, Mason Wynn, top 50 prospect in baseball. Like, these are legit names. I really like the wraparound, like you were talking about, from the 8-9 back up to the top. You've got speed at the bottom, and you go to on base with Nootbaar, power with Contreras, on base with Donovan, power with Nadeau. You've got the alternating handedness as well. It's a very balanced lineup. I like how Always built it.
Yeah. Now it's going to be interesting how that changes. I mean, even if this is your standard lineup, obviously it's not going to be the same every day. And, you know, they've got to, you know, here we are 2 games into the season and we haven't seen Nolan Gorman, right? The guy that they were, you know, making big emphasis on, he needs to play every day. And here we, you know, again, it's 2 games and matchups, whatever. But it's going to be interesting to see how he fits in the lineup, right? How it changes when he needs to play. And occasionally Luke Baker's going to have to get out there. You know, Pedro Pajes probably catches tomorrow. So this ideal lineup is working well, but I'm very interested to see what it looks like when you have to start giving people a rest.
Yes, and I'm interested to see who Oli goes with against a left-handed pitcher. You could probably keep Nootbaar at leadoff. He's got decent splits both ways. But then after that, I mean, you mentioned Gorman. You really can't throw him out against a lefty. Burleson struggles heavily against left-handed pitchers. Pajes will probably be catcher. Herrera at DH. Luke Baker's got to get some time somewhere there too. So it'll definitely be convoluted at that point.
Yeah, I mean the decision to take Victor Scott North, which I like a lot. I'm very excited about it, and the way he played in spring is remarkable. But there's no doubt that it puts more of a crimp on this roster than we've expected. We've talked about the roster, how it was going to work once Nolan Arenado decided he was going to stay. But when you then add in, Victor Scott, who I think we'd all kind of assumed was going to have to just start at Memphis just because of configurations. I'm not really envious of Oli trying to figure out how to get all these guys to play on a regular basis, especially if somebody like Victor Scott or somebody like Jordan Walker or any of these guys really takes off to the point where it's hard to sit them.
Yes, I'm definitely not envious of Oli either. The two issues you mentioned, Nato staying on the roster, Scott going off in spring, that really made things much more complicated. You take Arenado off, there's space for Victor Scott second, there's space for Nolan Gorman. Siani gets to be a true fourth outfielder, not battling with anybody else. That's a pretty nice roster, but then you're losing a future Hall of Famer. So can you actually say it's a nice roster at that point? It's definitely a very tricky situation.
Yeah, I do like the fact that it looks like right now, Marmol's going to go to that, the defense first team in the 7th, 8th, and 9th. Today we saw it both days, but today especially, Jordan Walker gets the last at bat, and I think the end of the 7th or something like that, and Siani comes in, plays center, and Victor Scott moves over and plays right, and that that just strengthens that last couple of innings where hopefully they're not at the outfield anyway because you've got people like Helsley, but if they are, people are tracking it down, and hopefully that means you're not allowing for a significant comeback when you've got that kind of defense on the field.
Yes, he did it. Marmol did that both games. Siani, he pinch run for Herrera, and then he just swapped people around. Siani in the outfield. It seems like a true competitive playoff lineup where you've got guys coming in 7th, 8th, 9th innings, defensive replacements, stealing bases. Like that's the kind of stuff I remember from 2000s. You saw that with Adrian Chambers coming up. It's a competitive lineup. They're playing it that way. I just hope it continues to be competitive.
Yeah, and we're going to have to see results too. I mean, it's easy to kind of dismiss a couple of days, and probably should, right? It's just a couple of days, but we have seen Jordan Walker get a couple hits. I think I know at least one that hard hit ball down the line.
Yep, he had another one today as well.
Yeah, I was thinking he had one today. Plus, he got hit. And he got hit on the hand today. I was like, this is just his luck, right? And thankfully, it wasn't anything serious.
Yes, yeah. The single he had down the line, it's a shame it careened off the wall there. He could have had it gone all the way to the corner, but that was a rifle.
Yeah. He hits that hard ball like that and gets a long single out of it, and then Arenado hits one off the pitcher, and it turns into a double, right? Because Carrera can't pick it up.
He could have had third, I think, too, if you noticed there's no one there at first.
Yeah, I think it came up kind of wanting to be careful, but I think he wasn't going to take any risks. But that was baseball is not fair sometimes. Right. Back to Victor Scott, though, I think we really saw today probably more than we did even last year. I mean, granted, he didn't get on base a ton last year, but it seemed like even when he was on, they were very hesitant to let him run the way we thought he should. Today, man, it was shades of Vince Coleman, right? I mean, this idea of he gets on, he's taking second. There's not much you can do about it. And if that's what continues this year, man, that's going to be very interesting.
It's interesting and exciting. It's something that the Cardinals really didn't take advantage of last year with the rule changes and everything. I mean, you had burners like Siani and Mason Wynn, and they barely got double digits with stolen bases. I'm not sure if Siani actually even did because he never got on base. But Mason Wynn barely hit double digits. I think it'll be exciting to see if they let them loose this year, and it seems to be the case with Victor Scott so far. He's got 2 stolen bases today. Both times he got on base. Let him run, see what happens.
Yeah, and I mean, again, if you've got, as we were talking about that wraparound, right? If you've got Victor Scott and Mason Wynn on, if Newbar comes up and hits a single, you got a chance to drive in both those guys, no matter where they're at, just because of the speed that they have on the base path. So, and you're right, that's just not something we have gotten to see a whole lot. Siani had 20 last year.
Oh, okay, perfect.
And then
base enough.
Yeah, just enough, I guess. And then Goldie and Mason Wynn tied with 11, and then that was the only ones in double digits. Victor Scott only had 5. Of course, he again wasn't on base a lot. But yeah, I like that dynamic. I mean, to add to that, I know that there's a portion of the Cardinal fan base is very much um, wedded to the 80s style of ball, which I understand. I think can be overblown a little bit in this day and age, right? I mean, the power numbers are way, it's just a different game. But when you can add at least an element of that speed, not only does it make it more exciting, it just gives you more ways to win.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think from a larger non-game perspective, I think there's a lot of fans itching for some excitement, and there's a lot of fans who know the '80s teams really well. And if ownership, front office are looking to bring some fans back, shades of Vince Coleman and the 1980s teams will bring back a percentage of fans at least that they might have lost too. So it's beneficial on the field. It's beneficial for the bottom line of ownership, which they seem to be caring about quite a bit in the last couple of years. So.
And you wonder if that, I mean, just played a little bit of a role. I mean, not only, it's like, hey, we're not necessarily expecting to compete, although I think they want to compete and they're going to try their best. But, there's, again, the expectations of this being a 500 team are pretty normal. So it's like, hey, let them run, and at least people are going to, even if we're losing games, at least people, it's kind of like, Mark McGwire in the 90s, right? He had a whole lot of home runs and people didn't care as much about the fact they were a 500 team.
Yeah, have some fun with it. You're going to go down, at least enjoy it.
Right. And who knows, you might actually fluke into winning a few games that way too. So, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how that works out. I know there's not any concerns, but Wilson Contreras 0 for 9 the first 2 days. I don't think anybody's worried about that. In fact, I guess if you're going to pick anybody to go 0 for the first 2 games, it would probably be Contreras because there's so little concern about his offensive profile.
Yes, I think there's someone on Twitter X I saw that made a comment about him being 0 for so far. And if you nowhere else in the regular season would you look at a 2-game stretch and call it a slump. It's just a 2-game stretch is all it is. So I fully expect him to bounce back. Being at first base helps his bat significantly. He's not burning his knees for 2.5 hours every single game. He'll come back around. His spring was really good as well offensively. So I think he'll find his stretch, his touch.
Yeah, it was, I saw that play today where, he's trying to catch the ball and the runner runs through, because it's a wild throw from, I've forgotten who was pitching at the time. Anyway, I just saw that and I, had flashbacks of Scott Rowland and things of that nature. And we've seen collisions like that, really mess up some people's arms. And I thought, man, that's, just not what Contreras needed. He got out of being catcher, tried to stay healthy, but seems to be okay. He played the rest of the game. And, we've seen him play pretty well defensively so far at first. I've been a little bit surprised how well he's taken to first base. I know he may have had a few innings there before with the Cubs, but not much. But it's been very interesting to see how well he's adapted to that.
He has been adapting pretty well, I think, too. He seems to get the stretch down pretty well on throws. I think his job becomes much easier when you look who's across the diamond throwing him the ball. When you've got Arenado, Mason Wynn, one can hit a target from 500 feet away and the other can throw it 105 miles per hour. So that makes his job a little bit easier as far as receiving the throws. But I'm impressed as well. He's putting in the work. It's nice to see the results from it.
Trying to catch 105 miles an hour may not be as much fun as he would like to think, but yeah, I think it's been fun to see that, and I'm glad that he's adjusted well enough, and like I say, now that hopefully soon the bat will come around. And speaking of the other side of the infield, Nolan Arenado has, and we saw this in spring a little bit, but it feels like we're seeing a rejuvenated Arenado so far, right? I mean, he looks, in the little bit that we've seen, I think he looks different than he did the last couple of years.
He does. Yeah, he's got a fire within him. I don't know if it's all the young players around him that are pushing him. I don't know if it's internal motivation to boost his trade value or to prove something that he's not done yet. It's nice to see it. I thought he was funny too with the interview after the game about the fan run onto the field. It was funny to see him put his hand up to his ear, asking for more. Like it's not just a fiery hot on Arenado. It's a younger guy. It seems to be.
Yeah, I thought it was, and it's a little bit different, but I thought it was very interesting this spring the Cardinals always have the social media things where they're doing things with the players, like they're asking them about their favorite dogs or whatever little games they're playing or whatever that they put on Twitter or Facebook or whatever, the little videos. And usually it's the young guys that are doing that because they don't really have a choice, right? To some degree. But Nolan was in a lot of those this year.
Yes.
And I thought that was either that's a real attempt at leadership, of trying to, maybe in great, get the fans back on his side if there were any that weren't, or just really trying to be a Cardinal. But I thought it was really interesting to see him be involved in those kind of things that normally a veteran wouldn't be.
Yes, yeah, I think he wants to endear himself to fans a little bit too. As you get older, you start learning how to say no to things, and that might have been where he was at in his career for a little bit. And the young guys don't quite know how to say no, even to the social media team. But it's nice to see him looser, I think is a good word to put for him.
Yeah. Other than that, I mean, anybody else really stand out to you? I mean, obviously Lars Nootbaar's had a really great start to the spring or to the season. We talked a little bit about him getting on base and everything, but I think that's what we've said. If he can stay healthy, he's going to be a good one. And 2 days, he's still healthy.
Yes, yeah. Another thing that's really stood out to me is the defense all across the board. You mentioned Contreras showing some improvements. You had Mason Wynn with the diving catch today for the double play. Newt's diving catch in the outfield. Victor Scott II had his out in center. There are two things I was looking for this offseason, especially as the team was going younger, would be defense and speed. And so far, especially surrounding Victor Scott II, we're seeing those two improvements.
Yeah. Well, and even, I mean, he hasn't had a spectacular play, but I feel like even Jordan Walker has had a couple of, decent catches, right? I mean, they weren't high probability, or low probability catches or anything like that. But especially for him, like the first ball of the year, I think was hit that he had to go chasing after and caught. And he's had one that was a little bit closer, kind of back on the warning track. I think that's a good thing for him. I mean, we know that the defense has gotten better, but he's not, they sub him out at the end of the games. There's a reason, but it still feels like he's not quite the liability that he was earlier in his career out in the outfield.
Right. Yeah. It's not a black hole out in right field. And you even had Ivan Herrera today with what should have been a caught stealing as well. So, and that was something that he needed to work on too.
Right. Herrera's also got 4 hits in the 2 games. So, if he's not catching people, at least he's doing his part offensively.
He's making up for it on the other end. Yeah.
Right. But it would have been nice for him to get that steal. It was a tough call though. I wasn't surprised that they didn't overturn it, but
right.
It would have been nice for him to get that a little boost of confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the only other person we haven't talked about, Brendan Donovan, has also looked really good at second base, and I think that's going to be interesting. If he plays well enough at second, again, what does that mean for Gorman? Does that mean how does he get moved around in the ways that we think he should get moved around?
Yeah, we had a writer at Redbird Rants who put Gorman up against Dylan Carlson as far as like a top-ranked prospect. Strong year as he came up, faded pretty quickly the year after that, and then now doesn't really have much of a spot in the lineup. And I think it'll be interesting to see how Gorman goes throughout the next 3-4 months, see what happens in July at the trade deadline, if a spot opens up for him, or if Burleson falls off and Gorman plants him. I think he's in for a pretty interesting season, especially after essentially being promised 600 plate appearances throughout the offseason by the higher ups.
Yeah. It feels like something will have to give at some point in time, but we've said that before about the Cardinals, and it doesn't. So Mo's still there, and he's going to get his. He always seems to hold on to players a little bit longer than we might think he would.
But then he trades them early, and we all complain about them becoming all-stars.
that too,
yeah. So it's a double-edged sword.
We can find things to complain about. There's no doubt about it. So,
yep.
And I mentioned, Matthew mentioned this a little bit in the interview, but when you go back to opening day and you have the owners and you have Mo getting out there, and let's maybe, to be kind, get a mixed reception. I mean, again, people are going to do what people are going to do, and that's fine. But to some degrees, I wish people would also remember that, as disappointing as maybe the last couple of years are, this is still not a Pittsburgh organization or anything like that. This is still a fairly decent ownership, even if they could maybe do better.
Yeah, and I know recency bias stands tall for a lot of people, but Mozeliak, I think it was Jesse Rogers. He was on with Derek Gould recently, and he's a national guy from Chicago. He talked a lot about how respected Mozeliak is, even still to this day in the game, and how in his heyday he was top of his class. So I think it's easy to forget how good we had it for a little bit. I know that phrase is tough for some people to hear, but Mozeliak is still very well regarded amongst his peers. And then you mentioned Pittsburgh as an ownership group. You look at Miami, Oakland, like it could be much worse than what we have with the DeWitts.
Yeah. It's interesting because, I mean, it's difficult when you're talking about executives and stuff because not as many of them get into the Hall of Fame. And it seems like a lot of them that do have been on, some of the big markets. But, there has been at least general discussion or just, at least bantered about the idea of Mo making it into the Hall of Fame. I mean, obviously he'll make it into the Cardinal Hall of Fame. I don't think that's in any doubt, even if it's not added in by ownership or what the Red Ribbon Committee or whatever. But a guy that is, been here for 18 years overall, right? He took over in 2007. And then he was, assistant GM before that and everything like that. He's been involved with the Cardinals for 25 years. That kind of longevity plus the success that he's had, I mean, that at least gets you a case to be discussed.
It does. And you even look before he was announced general manager in 2007, he was a part of the draft for Molina, for Pujols. Like, I know that's not his GM resume, but his fingerprint was on the 2000s Cardinals pretty heavily as well.
Yeah, very much so. So, all right. So, is there anything else? I mean, that really stood out to you this week, or these couple games, or is there anything you're looking forward to as the Cardinals wrap up with Minnesota and then get to host the Angels?
I think it'll be interesting to see what the it's on a getaway lineup tomorrow, but the Sunday lineup looks like. See if anybody swapped out. You said Pages. I would agree with that. I am also scared for Tuesday when we go up against the Angels and Hendricks. So look out. There's going to be our first loss of the year.
Well, if the Cardinals can beat Kyle Hendricks, then it's a different kind of year, right?
Yes.
And maybe Brant Brown needs to go into the Cardinal Hall of Fame too.
Yeah, just right then, 5 games in, give him red jacket.
In there, but give him red jacket right now if we can beat it. I think that tomorrow's probably is a game. You have won the series, and there are guys that need to play, and so I would be expecting Gorman and Baker and Pages. And man, I don't know if you go Siani yet because he's gotten a chance to play defensively, but he hasn't had a chance to bat yet. But Victor Scott, look, I mean, again, just juggling that idea. You don't want anybody to cool off, but I think you've got to get those kind of guys in there because you don't want to, like they were talking about. I think it's on the broadcast, or maybe I turned the Nationals game on later, and I think that was game, and they talk about how it's easy for a manager to all of a sudden look up and realize they haven't used a guy in a week or 10 days or something like that, just because you're playing every day, kind of focused on that day. So I think that they really got to be deliberate about making sure, and especially a guy like Gorman, who they've made such a big deal about, right? He's got to get center bats. If he goes through the whole first series and doesn't even play or just pinch hits once, maybe tomorrow, I think that they open themselves up to a lot of criticism of what are you really doing here?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's not like his replacement Burleson is ridiculously good right now. I mean, he's batting 143, so there is logic behind get Burley out, give Gorman in there, give Burley a break for a day. Maybe he can come in later against a righty reliever for somebody and see if he can fill in there.
Yep.
Maybe for Luke and Baker, if he starts at first, throw in Burleson, 8th inning.
Yeah,
get the hand of
makes
balance.
Sense. Would make a lot of sense. So we'll see how it goes out tomorrow. Thomas, you got anything coming up at the site?
Not at the moment. Just getting some stuff posted here and there. I honestly can't remember. I haven't written for a couple days. So as far as pieces yet to be published or things that have gone out recently, my best recommendation is just to find me on the site and see if there's anything that fits your fancy.
There you go. Well, check him out over at Redbird Rants. Thomas, appreciate you joining me this evening to kind of put the second half of this show together. Next week, Kelsey Bird will be joining me and from Peace, Love, and Baseball. She'll be with us next week. So until then, for Thomas, I'm Daniel. Good night.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
Hi, everyone. Rich Bray here, and today I'm taking a look back at how the Cardinals acquired hard-hitting Mark Whiten just days before the 1993 season. As a young outfielder for the Cleveland Indians, Whiten had power, speed, and a cannon for an arm, but he had never quite managed to put it all together. After a tragic boating accident took the lives of Indians pitchers Steve Olin and Tim Cruz and left Bob Ojeda badly injured, Cleveland desperately needed arms. To help fill out their starting rotation, they agreed to send Whiten to the Cardinals in exchange for right-hander Mark Clark and minor league infielder Juan Andahar. Indians GM John Hart said, "If not for the events of last week, we wouldn't have made the trade. We're so thin that if we get a hangnail, we're in trouble." As a switch hitter, Whiten showed more power from the left side, but was a better contact hitter from the right. Despite his tools, Whiten never seemed to gain the trust of the Indians' front office. Whiten hit .254 with 9 homers and 16 stolen bases in 1992, but was just 4 for 45 with 2 outs and runners in scoring position that season. That failure to come up with big hits made him expendable in the Indians' search for pitching. Whiten's arrival gave the Cardinals a starting outfield of Bernard Gilkey in left, Ray Lankford in center, and Whiten in right, with Brian Jordan serving as a fourth outfielder. Cleveland, meanwhile, saw potential in Mark Clark. The 6'5" right-hander had struggled in St. Louis, going just 3-10 with a 4.45 ERA in 1992, but had shown promise in the minors. After making 15 starts for the Indians in 1993, Clark went 11-3 with a 3.82 ERA the following season. He pitched 10 years in the majors before retiring in 2000. Meanwhile, in St. Louis, Whiten unleashed his potential with arguably the best offensive game in Cardinals history. On September 7, 1993, in the second game of a doubleheader against the Reds, he hit 4 home runs and drove in 12, tying a major league record. As Whiten launched his third and fourth homers of the evening, even Reds fans cheered and gave him a curtain call. He finished the season with 25 homers and 99 RBIs. While he never again matched that level of production, that night in Cincinnati enshrined Whiten in Cardinals lore. He went on to play for the Red Sox, Phillies, Braves, Mariners, and Yankees, and even returned to Cleveland before retiring with a career .259 batting average, 105 homers, and 423 RBIs over 11 seasons. So that's the story of how Mark Whiten became a late addition to the Cardinals' 1993 roster, months before setting the team's single-game home run record. For more Cardinals history, visit stlredbirds.com or follow me on Twitter at remembrance, REMEMBIRDS. And thanks again, and go Cards.
Runner at first, 1 out, 2-0 to Whiten. Into center field! Did he? Yes! His 4th home run of the game. He has 12 RBIs. 15-2. Unbelievable. A grand slam, 2 3-run home runs, and a 2-run shot. Unbelievable.